News. This is All Things Considered. I'm Robert Siegel.
And I'm Audie Cornish. U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder visited Ferguson, Missouri today. He was there to meet with federal investigators. They're one of two teams trying to figure out what exactly happened when a police officer, Darren Wilson, shot and killed an unarmed 18-year-old Michael Brown. Both cases are expected to take weeks, if not months. And we hear more from NPR's Elise Hu. She says people in the area are frustrated with the wait.
What do we want?
Justice.
Where we want it?
Now.
What do we want?
Justice.
This morning, about 24 demonstrators showed up not in Ferguson, but in the St. Louis County town of Clayton. That's where the county prosecutor is prepared to present evidence to a grand jury considering Michael Brown's killing.
This means something to me, so I had to be here.
If you ask Lamont Farr and others demonstrating across the street from the courthouse, the county prosecutor, Robert McCullough, is a problem. They say he shouldn't even be in charge of this case.
We want Bob McCullough off the case. That's what we're here for today.
When McCullough was 12, his father, a police officer, was killed in the line of duty. McCullough is white. The man who shot his dad, black. For that reason, many in the community don't think the prosecutor can be objective.
We're fighting for justices across the world. We don't even have justice at home.
McCullough says his dad's death decades ago won't affect his judgment, and he's not going anywhere. Missouri Governor Jay Nixon said in a statement Tuesday he isn't asking the prosecutor to step aside. Besides, the county's investigation into Michael Brown's death isn't the only one underway. The Department of Justice is investigating whether Brown's civil rights were violated. Attorney General Eric Holder came to Ferguson today to meet with FBI investigators, law enforcement, and other community leaders. Agents have now reportedly conducted more than 200 interviews. But the answers and potential charges so many are demanding won't come quickly.
You're talking about at least months. It's not impossible in some civil rights investigations that they take years.
Paul Coggins is a former federal prosecutor who worked with Attorney General Eric Holder in the Clinton administration.
If you're looking for answers, those answers may be a long time in coming. In part because the rules, the guidelines for the Department of Justice, they're allowed to tell the community we're on the job, we're making progress, general things like that, but they're not allowed to share the specific evidence until an indictment comes down.
But Coggins says federal involvement could help quell distrust of the county's handling of the case. He's seen it before.
Sometimes it's very difficult for a DA or a county attorney to convince a community that he or she can be objective where the police are concerned. The Civil Rights Division prosecutes police officers all the time. That's what they do.
In Ferguson, on Canfield Drive, where police officer Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown, church pastor Corey Bush shows up daily.
I'll be out here as long as this is going on.
In the middle of the road, visitors add flowers, baseball caps, and stuffed bears to an ever-expanding makeshift memorial for Brown. Bush comes out to pass out food during the day and demonstrates at night.
One thing about it is it shifts. So whatever the shift is. So if the shift is moving off of West Florissant and we go to Clayton and protest there or whatever, just whatever it is, I'll be there.
She knows the big crowds will eventually dwindle, but Bush is from here, so she has no plans to stop participating.
This can go on until that verdict comes down. So we got to get the indictment first and then the verdict. So it may be a while.
As the legal process plays out, a neighborhood already so torn by unrest and uncertainty has no choice but to wait. Elise Hu, NPR News, Ferguson, Missouri.
Well, while investigators sort out what happened in Ferguson, we're going to ask, ideally, what should happen anywhere when a police officer stops someone in the street? What do police chiefs regard as best practices? Charles Ramsey is the police commissioner of Philadelphia and president of the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF, and he joins us now from Philadelphia. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
In a recent report by PERF on minimizing the use of force, the San Diego police chief said that the issue of the police use of force is what keeps police chiefs awake at night. Is that right?
Well, it's certainly one of the things that keeps you up at night because there's always a concern that all it takes is one incident to not go well, and then you have a problem on your hands.
Let's talk about how to make things go well. Two young men walking down the middle of a street, not unique to Ferguson, Missouri, nor is a police officer getting some lip from them. He says something impolite back to the cop. What does the police officer do?
Well, listen, we have I've had a lot of impolite things said to me, and I think every police officer has, there's a certain amount of things that you just have to be able to deal with. And certainly no one wants to be spoken to in a disrespectful way. However, it does on occasion happen. That in and of itself is not something that you can arrest an individual for.
Well, assuming that there's now the potential for some kind of conflict, how do you avoid what might be a case of angry words exchanged escalating into a shooting incident?
Well, but you do it through de-escalation. I mean, a lot of situations start off at a very high level for whatever reason. You know, stress, bad day, whatever it may be that really causes the exchange to start off in a negative tone. But someone has to take control of it and do everything they can to try to de-escalate the situation. Very few contacts between police and the public result in a shooting. There are situations where it may result in an arrest. There are situations where it results in actually absolutely nothing happening. But you've got to have the ability to be able to try your best to try to de-escalate a situation if you find it getting out of hand.
Are there clear rules for police officers following best practices of when you can shoot, when you should shoot at somebody?
Absolutely. It's all part of legal guidelines, actually. If you feel that your life is being immediately threatened or the life of another, you can resort to deadly force. Now, as a last resort, and certainly there's nothing more important than sanctity of life, but there are circumstances, unfortunately, when an officer would have to resort to deadly force.
If an officer senses that something's getting out of control, should he call for help? Is he instructed to call for another officer?
If you are able to call for an assist, then call for an assist. Because again, if you have more than one person present at a scene, oftentimes it makes it easier to gain control of a situation and minimize the amount of force that has to be used. Sometimes you don't see it coming. Sometimes you don't see a situation escalating. And it doesn't take long for these things to happen. It can happen very, very quickly.
Are officers told that when you do shoot, you are shooting to kill, to stop the suspect from advancing, to disable? What is the point of shooting at that moment?
Well, you want to stop the threat. You want to neutralize the threat.
Well, killing obviously neutralizes the threat, but
I mean, not everyone who's shot by a police officer dies.
Right.
I mean, but you want to neutralize the threat. But you know, this notion like on TV where you can shoot a gun out of somebody's hand or whatever. I mean, you have to also be concerned about the background. I mean, if you fire a bullet, it's going to continue until it stops. And if you miss an individual, if it penetrates and goes through, then there's somebody else down the street that you didn't intend to shoot that could be struck. So there's a lot of things that happen. And remember, these things happen in a matter of seconds. I mean, this isn't, we replay it over and over again. We think about it and talk about it for months at a time. But it starts and it's finished within 5 or 6 seconds in most instances. That's the reality of it. And so you don't have a lot of time to really think about all this stuff. You have to really rely on your training.
In the Police Executive Research Forum report that I mentioned, the report on minimizing the use of force, the San Diego police chief said something else that was very interesting. He said that everybody on their police force naturally wants to be a narcotics detective or a homicide detective, whereas those aren't your problem areas. They're officers on the street are the most difficult. And so he says, whenever people get promoted now, he has them, quote, volunteer to get back in uniform and be back on the streets so that they remain in touch with what most police officers facing the most problematic situations face. Does that make sense to you?
It makes total sense to me, and I share his philosophy. This job is about helping people. It's about interacting on a positive level with people. For an example, here in Philadelphia, since I've been here in 2008 is when I took over this department, all of the recruits that graduate from our police academy start off on foot patrol in areas of our city that have a high concentration of crime being committed in public space. Now, it does a couple things. One, it does have an impact on crime. Temple University did a study here that showed a 22% decline in crime in the areas where we established foot patrol. But more important than that, it teaches them at a very early age that there are more decent, law-abiding citizens living in that challenged neighborhood than there are criminals or people causing problems. You don't get that when you're driving 30 miles an hour in a Crown Vic down the street. You do get it when you're walking down the street. You have a chance to interact with everyday people on a positive No.
So you're saying the experience of doing foot patrol makes for a better police officer?
I think so. I mean, I think that it's something that we lost over time as we got more and more motorized, but I think that it's something we need to recapture. That's just my personal philosophy, and I don't mean just walking down a major business corridor checking on businesses. Not that that's not important, and you do need that, but let's get out there in the neighborhoods. Let's meet Miss Smith, Miss Jones. Let's find out what the issues are. You know firsthand who are the people out here causing problems, who are the people that are out here that can support and help you build those relationships. I mean, you can't lose when you have that kind of situation.
I know you have a city police force to run, but to the extent that you've paid any attention at all to what's going on in Missouri, is there anything about it that's had you scratching your head and being surprised by the way the police have handled it, the way people have reacted to the police, whichever?
Well, I mean, I think everyone has been kind of watching it. If you watch TV, in fact, you don't have much choice, since that seems to be the only thing on many of the cable news channels today. But certainly everyone is kind of, looking at it and learning from it, actually, in terms of the crowd control and the like. The people on the ground are the ones that really have the best feel for this. And I think, though, that on both sides, their de-escalation has to take place to get things back down so that cooler heads prevail. Our job as police is to help protect the constitutional rights of people to exercise their First Amendment rights.
Ferguson seems to be a roller coaster. That is, it's out of control, it's under control, people are happy, it's out of control, and it's under control again.
But that's the way these things go. But that's the way these things can go. I mean, it's not pretty. And when you have intense media coverage like we have now, it is not easy to handle these kinds of things. And hopefully they get through it. But the next few days are going to be very challenging.
Commissioner Ramsey, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you.
It's Commissioner Charles Ramsey, Police Commissioner of Philadelphia, who incidentally is also president of the Police Executive Research Forum.
Listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Robert Rodriguez is one of the most successful directors in Austin, Texas.
But living in a bubble over there in Texas and making my own studio, you kind of innovate new ways of doing things that maybe people are surprised at the methods sometimes that I'll use.
I'm Kelly McEvers. Robert Rodriguez on making Spy Kids, El Mariachi, and Sin City 2 on the next morning edition from NPR News.
Tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 a.m.
You've got a great idea for a business. Now what? Or you've got a business but you need more business. Now what?
Facebook is great because it is the largest audience in the world. But as a marketer, it's great because I can use it to create the smallest audience in the world.
The angel investors who will put capital into the businesses but also bring mentorship, Rolodexes, guidance.
Angel investor Mike Eckert and international sales guru Knut Bertelsen out to lunch Thursday at 1, Friday at 6:30 on WWNO.
3:20 on Wednesday afternoon, All Things Considered from New Orleans Public Radio, your source for NPR News. Support for WWNO comes from Caraway LeBlanc LLC, downtown New Orleans law firm helping clients with business and personal injury lawsuits, contracts, zoning issues, and successions, and specializing in personal service. Attorneys Katie Caraway and Anne-Marie LeBlanc can be reached for more information at 566-1912.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Robert Siegel.
And I'm Audie Cornish. Today in our series on men in America, we're looking at something that once defined most men's lives, military service.
My father always taught us growing up that there's service to the community, service to the church, and service to the country.
Mark Pierce of Fillmore, Utah, served nearly 4 decades as a Green Beret. The man and his family have served since the Civil War. Mark and his son Jeremy, also a veteran, told me about their family tradition. And for Mark, his career began in 1970.
I knew going in the military I'd end up in Vietnam. My mother was sick about it because, she'd already had one son that had only lasted 3 weeks in Vietnam and had lost his foot. And now here I was joining up to go. And Mom tried to talk me out of it, but I said, you know what? I'm the 4th generation soldier in the family, and I'm going to go because it didn't kill the others, and it wouldn't kill me, I didn't think.
You know, all summer we've been talking with men about manhood and their experiences, and, you know, lots of families have a kind of rite of passage, whether it's the first hunting trip or handing over the keys to the car. Was there some moment when you saw Jeremy become a man, and was that wrapped up in the military tradition?
Yes, it was, because at the time Jeremy joined, I was in Iraq. We were getting rocket fire, and I would be talking to Jer about joining up via Skype, and then hear the explosions and the sirens, and then I'd have to leave. And his mother, my wife, was going, Jer, are you sure you want to do this? Look what your dad's going through. And he said, well, it's the family tradition. It's what we have to do.
For Jeremy, you know, for your generation, they are far less likely to have an immediate family member in the military. Mm-hmm. And so for you, was this a kind of benchmark of manhood?
So really when I felt that I had grown up and just become a man, it was also kind of a petty competitive side where my brother is older than me by about 3 or 4 years, but, you know, I'm larger than he is, so I've always been able to wrestle with him. And it was one of those where my brother joined, so, you know, well, crap, now I have to. I can't let him show me up on that.
Did you guys end up talking to each other about your combat experiences? Is that something that either of you initiated once you were both serving?
The main thing I told both my boys was, once you make a decision to pull a trigger or to do something that's going to end a life, you make absolutely sure that those conditions under which you do that are clear in your mind, because you'll relive that the rest of your life.
Jeremy, how did you take that advice? And you know, was it helpful?
It was, and there were a few times when I had to really take that advice to heart. And it was one of those, you know, my dad is getting to be a grandpa now, and he's constantly sprouting off advice. And it was just kind of another one of those, like, oh, great, Dad, thanks for telling me now something else. And then once I got into Iraq, and there was a few confrontations, and it just kind of seemed to slow the world down.
You heard his voice coming back to you.
Yeah, I mean, we had one point where a person was trying to drive a car through our gate, and we didn't know if they were, like, lost or if they had a car bomb, and it ended up that he was just an innocent civilian who was just trying to turn around in our gate.
For both of you, when you look back on your experience, I mean, what did you think it would give you in terms of becoming a man?
Okay, I'll boil it down to you. In the crucible of combat, you will learn more about yourself and the people around you in 5 minutes of combat than you will the rest of your life. It's a tough lesson, a hard way to learn it, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Jeremy?
For me, when I joined the Army, I was very immature, and I thought that being a man was just about, you know, being able to grow a full beard and having a deep voice. But similar to what my father said, you just take an unpolished look at yourself, and you know exactly how you are as a person and what you need to do to improve.
What about military service and combat still connects to a male tradition to you? And maybe, Mark, I can start with you, because you also have a daughter, right?
Yes, and because of our family tradition, I always said to the boys, you can go in the military if you want. I told my daughter I didn't want her to, because I'm 62, and I grew up in the era when women stayed home and raised kids, and, you know, we were all subject to the paradigms we learned when we were raised growing up, and that's mine.
Jeremy, for you, thinking about, as Mark called the paradigm you were raised in, is your thinking different on this?
So actually my wife is in the Army. She just hasn't deployed yet, and I'm hoping that she doesn't. But I feel like military service isn't tied to any sort of machismo or masculinity per se. It's just throughout the media it's twisted towards that, where whenever you see anybody in the military, they're usually like, you know, Sylvester Stallone or something ridiculous, where they're over the top manly.
But it does feel a little different to have a spouse in the military with the potential for them to deploy and also have a kid, right? I mean, this seems like this experience would be very different than maybe what your dad went through.
yes. It was actually good to have my wife, who was in the service, because I could open up and talk to her more than some of my peers. With them, they can kind of fool their wives and be like, oh, that faint mortar fire in the background, that's nothing. That's a training exercise.
Mark, listening to that experience, what are you thinking? Does it feel foreign?
Well, for me, the hardest thing was my poor wife. We've been married almost 30 years now, and so she's been on board. By the way, I'm very proud of my daughter-in-law. She outranks me. I gave her first salute when she was commissioned, which I thought was terrific. Anyway, my wife, it was tough on her, especially when I would come back from the combat missions, because I'd never talk about it, and I wouldn't. And I'd sit there, and she'd say, "What's bothering you?" And I'd say, "I can't even talk about it."
Jeremy, I know you have a son. Would you want him to join the military?
I wouldn't want him to join, but if that's his decision, I'd support him in it.
But it really is something to be able to say you have a family tradition going back to the Civil War. And I don't know, Mark, if, there's be some disappointment if that tradition ended here.
No, times change, people change. I encourage everyone to try the military or try something to challenge yourself, because as I said back in high school, I said, when I'm old, I want to have a lot of neat stories to tell, and I do, and now both my sons, now they have some stories to tell. And so hopefully, as the grandchildren get older, we'll be able to bore them to death at family reunions.
You do that now.
Jeremy Pierce and his dad, Mark. Jeremy served in the Army for 7 years, his dad for 40. Jeremy's son, Mark's grandson, is Malcolm Pierce. He turned 1 on July 4th.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR member stations and from Barracuda Networks, working to simplify and solve complex IT problems like data protection and disaster recovery. More at barracuda.com. From America's Natural Gas, learn how UPS is reducing emissions in communities with their growing fleet of natural gas vehicles. Thinkaboutit.org. And from CarMax, offering more than 35,000 used cars and trucks, online and in stores from coast to coast. Learn more at CarMax.com. This is NPR.
At 3:29, you are tuned to New Orleans Public Radio 89.9 WWNO and WWNO.org. New Orleans Public Radio, your source for NPR News. Good afternoon to you. I'm Jack Hopke. It's All Things Considered. We'll look at the forecast for you. 85 degrees with appreciable humidity up at around the 70% mark. We have a heat index of 93. Perhaps a little bit below what the forecasts were, but we'll take that. 30% chance of showers and thunderstorms right now. South winds around 5, 20% chance of showers and thunderstorms this evening before 9 p.m. We will be partly cloudy in the overnight period with, once again, a low around 80 degrees. Those same southerly breezes at 5 to 10. Looking ahead to Thursday, again, a 20% chance of showers and thunderstorms. That will be after 10 o'clock in the morning. Mostly sunny in the afternoon, highs about 92, winds will move to the west. Support for WWNO comes from International Culture Exchange, offering year-round Chinese language classes and culture for adults and kids. Presented by native Chinese language teachers at their Tulane campus. Lessons are designed to give individual attention. Fall classes start soon. NOLAChineseLanguageSchool.org or 273-6737.
From NPR News in Washington, I'm Louise Schiavone. President Obama says the nation will be relentless in its battle against Islamic State militants, who he says have appalled the world with their brutal murder of American journalist James Foley. The New Hampshire native was abducted in Syria 2 years ago. Senator Jeanne Shaheen of Foley's home state condemned the terrorists.
We saw from the barbaric video that ISIS posted that
they are not dealing in ways that civilized nations and peoples do.
And she says the U.S. will not be deterred from its efforts to protect Americans and support innocent civilians facing terrorism. In Missouri, protesters took their demands for justice for teenager Michael Brown, fatally shot by a Ferguson policeman, to the St. Louis County Courthouse today. Among their demands that Officer Darren Wilson be charged in the shooting instead of the case going to a grand jury. Nancy Fowler of St. Louis Public Radio reports protesters believe they have a movement.
What are reportedly Michael Brown's last words have become the mantra of demonstrators. Many feel his death is galvanizing a new era of the civil rights movement. Mallory Davis of Atlanta joined the march, representing the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Davis says his group has organized around Trayvon Martin and the Gina 6, but this effort is overshadowing even those cases.
The sustained presence of protesters and of organizers, I have not seen.
Davis says it's important to document this protest as it takes its place in history. For NPR News, I'm Nancy Fowler.
On Wall Street, the Dow closed up 59, the NASDAQ was down 1 point, S&P 500 rose 4. This is NPR News.
On 89.9 WWNO and WWNO.org, New Orleans Public Radio, support for NPR comes from Squarespace, offering an all-in-one website building platform for creating and growing businesses online. Learn more at squarespace.com/publicradio. 3:33, I'm Jack Hopke with you. Don't forget, please, that underwriting programming here on this radio station's public station